You won't believe what just happened on a flight when Big Shaq's own mother turned down a first-class upgrade, not knowing her son was the one who owned the airline. It's a jaw-dropping moment that had everyone shaking their heads. How could she possibly refuse such an exclusive offer? Well, stay tuned, because we're about to dive into the most unexpected twists in the world of luxury travel, celebrity family dynamics, and unthinkable surprises. That'll leave you questioning everything. But here's the kicker. This isn't just about a missed opportunity. It's about something much bigger, something you'll never see coming. You've clicked on this video for a reason, and trust me, the answer to the mystery of why Big Shaq's mom didn't know her son was the airline's owner is more mind-blowing than you could ever imagine. Stick around till the end because we're going to unravel this crazy story. And believe me, you don't want to miss how it all plays out. Buckle up, it's about to get wild. Big Shaq, known for his larger-than-life persona, had become a household name over the years. But behind the fame and fortune, there was a side to him that few knew about, a side tied to his family, and a series of events that would leave even the most seasoned celebrities scratching their heads. As one of the richest figures in the entertainment industry, it wasn't just his music or comedy that had catapulted him to stardom. It was his deep investments into industries people didn't even know existed. One of those industries? Airlines. Yes, you heard it right. Big Shaq, the man who once rapped about being man's not hot, was now the owner of one of the most prestigious luxury airlines in the world. But while Big Shaq was rolling in millions, there was something the public didn't realize. His mom, a woman whose world was far removed from the glitz and glamour fame, had no idea about her son's latest business empire. To her, Shaq was still her little boy, the one she raised with love and values, the one who would always come home for Sunday dinner. It's a mystery to most how someone with so much public visibility could live a life so detached from the reality of his own family. And that's where this story starts to get interesting. The day in question started like any other. Shaq's mother, a humble woman with no interest in the lavish lifestyle her son led, was preparing to board her flight to visit family in the States. She had been traveling a lot lately, taking trips across the globe without much fanfare. It was just another routine trip for her, nothing out of the ordinary. But little did she know that she was about to walk into a situation that would shake her understanding of the world and her son forever. As she stepped into the airline's terminal, she was greeted with the usual smiles from the staff, familiar faces who recognized her from past visits. But on this particular day, the atmosphere seemed different, a bit more tension in the air. The attendant at the check-in desk looked at her, almost nervously. "Good morning, Mrs. Shaq." The attendant greeted her with a forced smile. "I see you're all set for your flight today, but if you don't mind, we'd like to offer you an upgrade to first class." Mrs. Shaq, looking at the young woman with a quizzical expression, simply shook her head. "No need for all that," she replied with a warm smile. "I'm perfectly fine with my regular seat. I've been traveling this way for years, and that's all I need." She didn't think twice about it. To her, an upgrade was just an unnecessary luxury, something reserved for celebrities or business tycoons, not regular folks like her. But the attendant seemed almost hesitant, as though she were about to speak. But something held her back. "Are you sure?" she asked again. "It's a complimentary upgrade from the company, and we'd love to have you experience the extra comfort." Mrs. Shaq nodded kindly, but was firm in her decision. "I appreciate it, but I'm fine with the economy seat. Thank you." The attendant, after a moment's hesitation, finally let her proceed, albeit with a look that suggested she was more confused than anything else. As Mrs. Shaq made her way to her gate, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The staff seemed to be watching her closely, whispering among themselves. It wasn't until she boarded the plane and took her seat that things started to feel even stranger. When she sat down, the flight attendants were unusually attentive, hovering near her more than they did with the other passengers. It was clear they were expecting something, an interaction perhaps, or a response. But Mrs. Shaq didn't notice. She was far too used to being treated with respect. After all, she was an ordinary woman, and that was how she preferred it. But there was one thing she hadn't considered. The airline wasn't just any airline. It was his airline, the one her son, Big Shaq, had invested in and owned. This wasn't just a luxury experience. It was his empire, one that had grown out of his fascination with aviation and his desire to bring a taste of luxury to the skies. He was proud of the airline, proud of how it catered to the elite. But he had never told his mother about it, preferring to keep that part of his life separate from the family. She didn't know that the stewardess she had been chatting with was a part of the exclusive crew that only serviced Shaq's personal flights. She didn't know that the airline she was flying with was one that catered to a very special clientele: celebrities, business moguls, and yes, the occasional famous family member. As the plane took off, Mrs. Shaq settled into her seat, unaware of the fact that her son's company had just been sitting right under her nose this whole time. Back at the headquarters of the airline, Big Shaq was checking in with his team, reviewing flight schedules and making sure everything was running smoothly, when he received a message from his assistant, alerting him that his mom was on board one of his flights. His heart skipped a beat. He had been meaning to tell her about his ownership of the airline, but the right moment never seemed to come. Now, he couldn't believe it. His mother was flying with his company, completely unaware that it was his, and she had just turned down the first-class upgrade. The thought of it struck him as both hilarious and a little bittersweet. He knew that in her eyes, he was still the son she raised in the same small house with love and simplicity. She didn't care about his success or wealth. All she wanted was to see him happy, to see him grounded. But this moment, this awkward, unknowingly funny moment, would change everything. For Shaq, it was a perfect storm of celebrity, family, and the ultimate twist of fate. But what was more intriguing to him was how the staff had reacted. Why had they seemed so unsettled when she turned down the upgrade? What was it about the way she had refused that had triggered this response? Was there more to this interaction than he realized? And why hadn't anyone told her that her son was the one behind the airline? Was it because they didn't think she'd care, or was there something deeper happening here? The next few hours were filled with tension. Shaq paced around his office, making calls to his team and checking in on his mother's flight. He wanted to know how things were going. Was she comfortable? Was everything okay? The last thing he wanted was for his mother to feel awkward or out of place on one of his flights. He wanted her to enjoy herself. He had built this empire with her in mind, to give her the best. But for some reason, she was oblivious of the fact that the empire had been built by her own son. As the plane touched down at its destination, Shaq's curiosity grew even stronger. He was determined to see her face when she found out the truth. Would she laugh? Would she be shocked? Or would she be upset that her son had kept this from her? He knew his mother well enough to understand that her reaction wouldn't be predictable. She had always been a woman who valued humility and honesty. Would this new knowledge shake the foundation of their relationship, or would it only strengthen it? It wasn't until Mrs. Shaq disembarked from the plane that the real drama began to unfold. The staff had gathered to greet her, a little too eager for her taste. And it wasn't long before one of the senior attendants, a woman who had been working for the airline since its inception, pulled her aside. "Mrs. Shaq, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but your son, Big Shaq, he's actually the owner of this airline," she whispered, almost as if afraid of saying too much. Mrs. Shaq froze. "What?" she gasped. "My son? The owner of this airline?" The words didn't seem to make sense. She turned to the attendant, her face a mix of confusion and disbelief. "You mean to tell me he's been running this whole operation and he never told me?" The attendant nodded, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I thought you knew." Mrs. Shaq stood there for a moment, her mind racing. This was the moment that would change everything. But what was she supposed to do with this information? And why had Big Shaq kept it from her? As she walked away from the airport terminal, her thoughts were consumed by one question. What else was he hiding? And this is where the story really begins. Stay tuned, because the truth is far more complicated than anyone could have imagined as Mrs. Shaq walked out of the airport terminal. Her mind was still reeling from shock. She couldn't wrap her head around the revelation that her son was not just the man behind the music and comedy, but was also the owner of the very airline she had just flown with. The idea of her son, who had grown up in the same modest surroundings as her, owning something as vast and luxurious as an airline seemed almost too surreal to believe. She had always thought of him as someone grounded, someone who never let fame change him. Yet here she was, learning that he had built an empire right under her nose. As the reality of the situation sank in, she realized just how much she had been left in the dark, and it stung. But what bothered her more wasn't the fact that her son had achieved such monumental success. It was the secrecy. Shaq had always been open with her, always kept her in the loop about his life, even the crazy parts. So why had he kept this from her? Why hadn't he told her about his business ventures? Was he trying to protect her, or was there something else at play? The questions piled up in her mind, and the answers were nowhere to be found. Later that evening, Shaq called his mother, his voice filled with excitement and a hint of nervousness. "Hey, Mom, how was your flight?" he asked, trying to sound casual. But Mrs. Shaq wasn't in the mood for small talk. She had spent the entire day processing what she had just learned, and now it was time to get to the heart of the matter. "Shaq," she began, her voice steady but laced with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you ever mention that you owned the airline? I had no idea. I had no clue whatsoever." Shaq paused, a brief silence hanging between them. He had hoped to avoid this conversation for as long as possible, but now it seemed inevitable. He had always been protective of his mother, wanting to shield her from the complexities of his life. The world of business, fame, and luxury was a far cry from the world she knew, and perhaps he had convinced himself that keeping this part of his life hidden was for the best. "Mom, I didn't think it was important," Shaq said, his voice softer now. "I wanted you to experience the world on your own terms, without feeling like you had to be involved in all this. You know how I've always been about keeping things simple." But Mrs. Shaq wasn't buying it. She had raised him to be honest, to trust her with everything, and now she felt betrayed. She had spent years watching him succeed, watching him climb to heights that most could only dream of. But now, she realized that there was a whole side of him she had never known. "I get that, Shaq," she replied, her tone still calm but tinged with hurt. "But you're my son and I'm your mother. I should have known. You can't just keep something like this from me. It's not about the money or the success. It's about feeling like I'm a part of your life, not just a bystander." Shaq felt a lump form in his throat. He had never wanted to hurt her, but he had kept so much of his life under wraps for so long that he hadn't realized how much it had affected her. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have told you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I promise, it wasn't because I didn't want you to know. I just didn't know how to explain everything." Mrs. Shaq sighed, a mixture of frustration and resignation in her voice. "Well, now you've got a lot of explaining to do, son, and I'm not sure I'm ready to hear all of it just yet." Their conversation ended on a bittersweet note, with Shaq vowing to make things right. But as he hung up the phone, a gnawing feeling took hold of him. This was just the beginning. The truth about his airline, his business dealings, and the secrets he had kept hidden for so long were now out in the open, and he knew that this revelation was just the tip of the iceberg. The next few days were filled with tension as Shaq tried to figure out how to mend his relationship with his mother. He tried calling her multiple times, sending her gifts, and even arranging a dinner to apologize in person. But she was distant, her emotions still raw from the bombshell he had dropped on her. He knew it was going to take time for her to process everything, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. As the days passed, Shaq's life began to unravel in ways he hadn't anticipated. The media, always quick to pick up on any juicy story, had caught wind of the fact that he owned the airline. News outlets were running headlines like, "Big Shaq's airline secret revealed," and "The truth behind Big Shaq's empire." It wasn't long before the story went viral, with people from all corners of the globe expressing their surprise and fascination. Shaq had always been a figure of mystery, but this new revelation added a layer of intrigue that no one had seen coming. What the public didn't know was that there was more to the story than anyone could have guessed. While Shaq had been busy trying to mend his relationship with his mother, his business dealings were starting to take a turn for the worse. There were whispers within the company that someone was trying to take him down, to sabotage his success, and expose secrets that could ruin everything he had worked for. One morning, Shaq received an anonymous tip that someone within his company had been leaking information to the press. The tip was vague, offering no concrete evidence, but it was enough to send a chill down his spine. Who could be behind this? And why? It didn't take long for him to realize that the leaks weren't just random rumors. They were strategic, targeted at bringing down the very empire he had built. Someone had it out for him, and they were willing to use his own family's privacy to destroy him. But that wasn't the only thing Shaq had to worry about. As he began to dig deeper into the leaks, he uncovered something even more disturbing. There were financial discrepancies within the company's books, large sums of money being funneled through offshore accounts to unknown entities. It was a scheme so elaborate that it took Shaq days to fully comprehend the scope of it. Someone had been siphoning money from the airline, and if Shaq didn't act quickly, it could bring everything crashing down. The question was, who could be behind it all, and what did they want? Shaq had always trusted his team, but now he began to wonder just how many of them were involved in this conspiracy. The deeper he dug, the more questions arose. Was there someone within the company who had been working against him all along, or was there a bigger player at work, someone outside the organization pulling the strings? In the midst of all this chaos, Shaq received a mysterious call late one night. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the message was clear. If you want to save your company and your mother, you need to stop digging. There are things you don't know, things you're not ready to hear. The call ended abruptly, leaving Shaq more confused and unsettled than ever before. Who was this? And what did they know? Shaq felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. His relationship with his mother was on the rocks. His business was under attack, and now he was facing a new enemy, one he couldn't see or understand. He had always believed that success came with its own set of challenges, but this was something he had never prepared for. As the days turned into weeks, the stakes continued to rise. The leaks were getting more frequent, the financial discrepancies more troubling. Shaq couldn't ignore the fact that someone was orchestrating this from behind the scenes. And the more he tried to uncover the truth, the more dangerous the situation became. Whoever was pulling the strings had a clear agenda, and Shaq was right in their crosshairs. With each passing day, Shaq realized that he was no longer in control of his own destiny. His empire, the one he had built from the ground up, was slipping through his fingers. And as the walls closed in around him, he couldn't help but wonder, was his mother's rejection of that first-class upgrade the first sign of something much bigger? Was this all part of a larger plan, one that he hadn't yet fully understood? As the tension reached its peak, Shaq knew one thing for sure. He had to find out who was behind the attacks, or everything he had worked for would be lost. But the more he dug, the more he realized that the answers he sought were not just buried in the business world. They were tangled in the personal relationships he had tried so hard to keep separate from his success. And with every twist and turn, Shaq was beginning to understand that the biggest mystery of all wasn't about money, power, or fame. It was about family. As the days wore on, Shaq's frustration began to mount. The mysterious calls, the cryptic messages, and the growing feeling that everything he had built was on the verge of unraveling left him sleepless. Despite all the wealth and success he had accumulated over the years, there was one thing that kept him grounded: the desire to protect his family. His mother, especially, was at the center of his thoughts. She had always been his moral compass, the one person who had never asked for anything in return. But now, the tension between them felt impossible to overcome, as though their relationship was drifting into murky waters from which there was no return. Shaq couldn't let it go. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. His business was under attack, yes, but so was his integrity. The leaks in the company's structure were only a symptom of something much deeper, something far more sinister. But who could be behind it? The media had already caught wind of the crisis, and every outlet was speculating about the so-called mystery of Big Shaq's empire, a saga of success gone awry. The last thing he wanted was for the world to see him as a failure. But deep down, he knew that this wasn't just about the business. It was about something bigger, something much closer to home. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Shaq began to work with his most trusted associates, diving headfirst into the financial discrepancies that were plaguing the company. Late nights became routine, and soon he began to uncover troubling patterns in transactions. Offshore accounts, hidden dealings, and wire transfers to untraceable entities were all signs of an operation far more sophisticated than a mere leak. This was a full-scale conspiracy, and it was coming from within. As Shaq started connecting the dots, his suspicions grew. He had always known that the world of business was cutthroat, but this felt personal. It wasn't just money or power. Someone wanted to bring him down, to destroy everything he had worked for. But who? And why? It wasn't until he stumbled upon an old email chain from a company-wide communication thread that the pieces finally started to fall into place. The emails buried deep in the archives were from a key executive, someone he had trusted for years. The messages revealed not just financial discrepancies, but also hints of a much darker plot. This executive, who had been Shaq's right hand for years, was using his position to siphon money from the company while simultaneously undermining Shaq's authority. The betrayal hit Shaq like a ton of bricks. But it didn't stop there. The emails also revealed that this executive had been in communication with a rival company, one that Shaq had been unknowingly competing with for months. Shaq felt his blood run cold. He had been blindsided, deceived by someone he thought of as family. But the shock of this revelation paled in comparison to what came next. In the middle of his investigation, Shaq received a phone call from his mother. Her voice was steady, but there was something in her tone that told him this wasn't just a casual check-in. She had learned something that would change everything. "Shaq, I need to talk to you," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "There's something you don't know." He felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he listened, unsure of what to expect. "What is it, Mom?" "I didn't want to tell you this over the phone," she continued, "but you need to know that executive, he's not just working against you. He's working for someone else. Someone close to you." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Shaq's heart raced as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. It wasn't just business, it was personal. Someone had been using his own people against him, feeding them lies, manipulating them, and all the while, Shaq had been none the wiser. The realization hit him harder than any betrayal he had ever experienced. But what shocked him most was the identity of the person behind it all. It wasn't just a rival company. It wasn't just a disgruntled employee. It was someone from within his own family, someone who had access to his private affairs, someone he had trusted with his deepest secrets, his own flesh and blood. The revelation left Shaq reeling. His mind raced, trying to make sense of conspiracy that had been unfolding right under his nose. How could someone he had been so close to, someone he had shared his life with, be involved in something so treacherous? As the truth began to sink in, Shaq realized that this was no longer about business. It was about loyalty, trust, and the complex web of relationships that had defined his life. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized that the one thing he had been trying to protect, his family, was also the thing that had been used against him. Determined to face the truth, Shaq called a meeting with the key players in his company. The board of directors, his closest associates, and even some of his family members, all gathered in one room. And for the first time in weeks, there was no avoiding the confrontation. He stood in front of them, his heart pounding in his chest. The truth was about to come out, and it wasn't going to be easy. "I know what's been happening," Shaq began, his voice firm but calm. "I know about the leaks, the financial discrepancies, and the betrayal, and I know who's behind it." He paused, looking each person in the room in the eye. It's time for the truth to come out. No more secrets. No more lies. The room fell silent. The tension was palpable, and everyone knew that this moment was a turning point. The question was, who would emerge from this meeting with their reputation intact? And who would fall? Shaq's eyes locked with the executive who had been at the center of it all. The man's face was pale, his lips tight as he tried to maintain his composure. But Shaq could see the guilt written all over him. "You've been using your position to destroy everything I built," Shaq said, his voice steady despite the rage bubbling beneath the surface. "And for what? To tear this company apart? To destroy everything I've worked for?" The executive didn't respond. Instead, he looked down at his feet, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The room was filled with a heavy silence as Shaq's words sank in. "I trusted you," Shaq continued, his voice breaking slightly. "But you didn't just betray me. You betrayed all of us." At that moment, the truth came crashing down like a tidal wave, and with it, the weight of Shaq's decision. The executive was removed from the company, and the crisis was averted. But the damage had already been done. As Shaq walked out of the meeting room, he felt a strange sense of relief. The storm had passed, but the scars would remain. He knew that the road to rebuilding would be long, but he was ready to face whatever came next. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't the business or the money that mattered. It was the people he loved, the trust he had with them, and the strength to overcome whatever obstacles life threw his way. And in that moment, he knew that no matter what the future held, he would always have his family by his side. The empire he had built may have been shaken, but it wasn't broken. And as long as he had the people who mattered most, he would never stop fighting. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of inner strength and resilience. Until next time, stay strong, stay brave, and never forget your worth.